Hey guys, Thomas the Solar Jr. here, aka Mustached Tom, here to review the movie Escape Room. So, before I do begin this review, I do want to say that I did watch at least two other reviews of this movie, which compared this movie to, say, Saw, the franchise Saw, of course, and I think one of the other movies mentioned was Cube, which is a movie which, yeah, I could see why. But oddly enough, in the previous year, prior to this one, another movie came out called, well, literally Escape Room. So this is either the second or third movie literally called Escape Room. So that was, I don't know how they did that, but oof. I don't know if there's going to be any trouble there in the naming convention, because now there's like either two or three movies literally called Escape Room. Fun. So now that I have that out of the way, let's begin with the recap and talking about how I felt about this movie. So, this movie starts with some person who we don't know falling down. This man is trying to solve what else? A escape room, as the room that he is in is closing in on him. He's grabbing all these hints and trying to solve this puzzle, looking at all these pointing fingers and so on and so forth, but we see that the time runs out. So we cut to our main character, and I put a little emphasis on main because she doesn't really do too much. Her name is Zoe. So Zoe is this smart character, or as we see very, very briefly, supposed to be a very smart character. So her teacher suggests that she does at least one thing that's supposed to scare her. We cut to this guy, this tall black guy. I honestly don't even know his name. I never caught it in the movie. Who also gets, after the motorcycle thing, he does some business stuff and so on and so forth, and then it cuts to our next character. I kept calling him Gary, although his name was something else or other. That was the name of the boss. The younger guy, whose name I honestly wrote down way later in my notes, but I'll just call him Gary for now, because, oops. Anyways, he also is getting told to suggest to do something to go make a friend. So, the black businessman gets a cube in the shape of a, cube. And he leaves for a moment as Zoe talks to one of her, and I suppose I'm putting that phrase lately, friend, who kind of mocks her and then leaves, and then she doesn't start to feel so good, so she like passes out, and I guess she ends up in a new location, and then also receives a box. I wrote down Ben, I think that's his name, the Gary kid, Ben. He also gets a box. So it shows two of the three of them trying to solve it. And then the third one joins in. And this little box puzzle is actually a clever invite to an escape room. So, Ben is the first to arrive, seeing this red-haired woman named Amanda. And her phone is taken as she makes her way onto the onto the room where this other smart aleck character, this guy, I think his name is like Finn or something. I wrote it down later when they actually called him out, but I didn't catch his name beforehand. And then there's Michael, our bearded big man. So we have our 6 contenders in the escape room. So they're all kind of waiting about. Most of them don't seem to want to even be there. So one of them, Amanda specifically, reads about being burned alive, and she kind of gets freaked out, kind of vaguely. So the Finn guy, I think I'll just call him that for now. Again, my notes are terrible for this review, so I'll apologize now. But he's trying to explain how he's been to various other escape rooms and how each of them have stories, and he's pretty much selling the idea of escape rooms to us moviegoers. So yeah. Ben sees that time has passed and he kind of wants to bail, but the door hinge falls off, and they proceed to now know, based off of this Finn guy's super ability to have essentially know these escape rooms, is able to take control of the situation and gets everyone else invested in. So they start to look around for clues, and they see this book, and one of, I believe it's Zoe, who sees that the book is called something specific, like Fahrenheit or something. So she tells them to dial it in, and the dial gets stuck. So the black guy picks up this, like, boat replica in one of those boats and looks at it quizzically, while Zoe picks up a key from this fake extinguisher, fire extinguisher. And they start to hear a phone call. And once the phone call ends, the windows start to shut down, and more hot fans come in, and everyone starts to freak out. So they see an air duct after doing something specific. It was like touching the table in a specific way, and the black man proceeds to volunteer to go first. We follow up with Michael and Amanda, who move up ahead. But Amanda starts to freak out as she had these vague flashbacks to war times and was a seasoned person in this, but got freaked out afterwards. So Zoe catches up and calms her down. Meanwhile, the remaining 2 people in the room, that being Finn and Ben, get these little glass cups and start to create a new way for them to literally escape that room. So they all manage to get out of the first room alive, and so they think, or the Finn character promotes the idea that this was all still a part of the game, that it was so convenient that the flame didn't get them, and thus they need a 7-letter word, and Ben sees these antlers on this wall and starts to get a flashback about surviving a car incident. So they solve that room pretty quickly, realizing that the code word was Rudolph, and they head outside, I'm going to put that in quotes, into a room that is absolutely freezing. So we went to a cabin-like room, and now it is freezing in this next room. So Zoe tries to pick up Ben as he's kind of like in this little zone. I believe, I've been calling him Finn, but I believe his name was Eddie. I wrote Eddie. I don't know if that's his name. Anyways, he heads out and hits this invisible wall, and this noise of an ice crack begins, and these vents of ice, or or snow or something or other start to zoom in. So they find a jacket, and Zoe is the first one who gets to put it on. And thus, Eddie, who is trying to get out this little lighter from Ben, who had it, to light up this key that they find. I forgot to put on a lot of this stuff. But, yeah. So, Mike picks up this fishing pole, and Zoe picks up this compass, so she's kind of taking charge in a whole another direction, reaches into the bear's mouth, gets the magnet, puts the magnet on the pole, and they are able to hook line the key, which is frozen. So, the smart guy that I kept referring to, not Finn, his name was Danny, I think. Whatever, anyway. Not that that matters anymore, because he ends up being the one who falls into the actual ice. Like, actually falls in. And he dies. So, the others have to keep their hands on the cube to let it freeze, and, we see that it was the black guy who had this incident dealing with ice. So all these characters had all these rooms designed for them in mind, as this movie infers later on. So anyways, he grabs the key, gets to the door, which is on the other side, and they all manage to get into the next room. The next room is quite an intriguing one, as it is upside down, and this phone begins to ring, playing really loud music, which is coming from the ceiling, which is actually the ground. So, Michael almost falls off of the floor, which is what appears to be the ceiling, but it is the floor, and that part falls off. So the floor that they are on is falling down, and if they fall, they will clearly die from that height. So Amanda starts to climb upwards towards what would normally be the floor, but in this case is the ceiling. And the others, and Zoe's starting to move around a little bit too. So, Michael lifts her up to this little slider puzzle, and she starts to figure that out. And whenever they get an answer wrong, which I believe they did twice, the more of the ground starts to collapse into the nothingness, or the long fall down. Zoe does fall down once, but she hits a surface that is not she will die surface, and she gets her own flashbacks of her mother. So she does get waken up, and Amanda takes charge, grabbing on to the phone cable, and the others are pulling themselves upwards, and they get to this corner where they can get out. So Amanda, unfortunately, the cable snaps, and she falls to her death. She manages to pass them the key to get to the next room. The room starts off dark, but it ends up lighting up as the remaining characters start to argue more and more. They see what appears to be a hospital room, where they see that they were all survivors of these catastrophic incidents that left them to be the ones that were alive at the end. So this TV comes on, showing them that they now have a timer, which is something that is usually indicative of an escape room, is a timer. So now that they actually have one, they start to rush even faster. But as three of the remaining characters, that being Ben, the black guy, and Michael, are trying to rush all over the place, Zoe starts to go off the hinge a little bit and destroys all the cameras in that room. So, Michael proceeds to uh, the black guy proceeds to zap Michael to death, trying to get his heart rate to be too high, but it turns out it needed to do the opposite. He needed to drop the heart rate down. So he ends up killing Michael in the process, but ends up opening the door as the gas is already coming in. So Zoe stays behind and gets locked into that room, but passes out. So we're left with Ben and the black guy, and the two of them begin to argue, as Ben realizes that this black guy kind of killed somebody, and that's how he was able to survive his ordeal. And the room that they are in is making them essentially go crazy. And Gary finds this injection in which the two of them fight over, but Ben does get the injection and injects himself, and thus leading the black guy to die of something or other. I don't know, the craziness came with something. I don't know, that part was kind of vague. So we see that Gary ends up in the room we saw in the beginning, and we can place it together that he was the one that we were seeing essentially fall apart. Trying to get that 4-digit code. So, as the movie cuts to these two undiscernible men who work their way into the escape room, Zoe comes back to life somehow, question mark, big question, and takes them both out. So, the room that Ben is in stops, and he's able to make his way into what looks like a warehouse. And he sees that he is the last survivor along with Zoe, and he starts to hear a voice. He talks to who he proceeds to be the game master of this specific game, this escape room. So he goes on about how life has become pretty simple, and that people want to be entertained, and I've heard this spiel before of like, oh, you know, we want to create something that brings back the excitement in life, essentially. So Gary gets a smoke and, for whatever reason, accepts it, but the game master proceeds to choke him out, which I assumed that the smoke was going to have something bad in it, but okay, go with something even more simple. Zoe shoots at him. I assume she missed, but she comes out of kind of the side of the room from another point of entry. And the game master, or that one in that room, starts to be placed in the game that they are in. He becomes an active participant. So, Ben catches him off guard and shoots him dead. So, some time passes, and Zoe and Ben wake up in the hospital, and the police arrive on the scene with Zoe. As they arrive back on the scene, and everything that was there is essentially removed, except for the phrase that is tagged "No Way Out." And she is able to discern through manipulating where the letters are that it once again spells Wu-Tan Yu. And thus, bizarrely, 6 months pass. Instead of her just screaming and that being the end, 6 months pass, and we see Zoe talk with Ben, even though they said that Ben from that was, like, dead, question mark? Like, the police said that something happened to him anyway. He's there, I guess, and he's alive. So, she starts to talk about how she was able to put together this code where they can see where the true game master is, the one who put them behind all of this. And we see it cut to this plane where we see people put on display, and we see the plane catch fire, and the plane gets all these riddles, and the pilots are dead, and the people fail to put it together, and thus we see that it was this super rig that this super game master sets up for both Ben and Zoe, as they proclaimed that they were going to take a plane to get to them, and that was Escape Room. Obvious sequel baiting ensued at the very end there. As compared to the other Escape Room, I felt like that one had more fantasy elements in it. This one, it felt like there was more trap. It was more trap based and more puzzle based and more akin to the actual people there, which I do appreciate that much in this movie. But I will say I do agree to the extent that I do think that the characters in the actual movie could have used a little bit more oomph to each of them. Particularly, I think it's very agreed that, particularly in the beginning, that should have been. I think the way that they should have set that up in the beginning was create a first room that's super easy, or easy enough for everyone in that room to figure out, and not one that's an immediate death trap. You know, get everyone kind of settled in, get them all thinking that it really is an escape room, like a legit one. I think if they did that one simple thing, I think that would have fixed a lot of what happens in this movie. At least from a starting point, I think that would have made for a much stronger starting point. And just having all the characters be a little bit more invested in what they're doing from the start, I think would have been, again, a very efficient way to start the movie. And as the rooms obviously become more and more dangerous, the character reveals of, like, how they were all, like, a part of this thing, that's fine. I do feel like there were some parts that were kind of either vague or didn't make sense, like how Ben ended up actually being alive, even though they said something about him not being alive or something near the end that didn't make any sense at all to me. Zoe ended up being alive to take out those two guards didn't make any sense to me. That room seemed to have been a poison, and she somehow got up and was able to have enough willpower to take them both out. So, yeah, and she had a real fire extinguisher with her held in her arms. So, that one was a little bit weird, considering that the first fire extinguisher that they saw was plastic. Now all of a sudden there's a real one? I don't know. I'm not. Again, the suspension of disbelief in this movie does get a little bit, from at least that point of perspective of, like, how these characters actually live, particularly these two, the ones that we see at the end, is probably one of this movie's biggest faults. So, tight knitting those little elements as well, and obviously, I go two ways about these sort of sequel baiting films. Either, it's either gonna fail or it's either going to succeed. There's no in between with these types of movies, really. There's just not really much else to say other than, if this movie does well enough, then I guess it's obviously going to be a sequel to it. But, if it fails, then it fails, and we'll see how that turns out. I don't know. As far as this movie is concerned, and all the elements in it, I can see that why the comparisons were made, particularly stronger to Cube. I found that one particularly more fascinating, since Cube has, at least in its follow-up movies, I think in the third one, this more human these humans are behind it or something. So sort of similar sequence there. So we'll see how that all plays out. But again, as for this film, I think it's like halfway there. So I'd give it a 5 out of 10. So if you enjoyed this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out that link in the description. I head over to my Patreon page. Any donations are greatly appreciated. Until next time, everyone. Bye-bye.